The wedding guest. At my son's engagement party, I thought I was witnessing the happiest moment of his life. But one look at his fiancée's eyes told me everything was about to change. What she whispered next nearly tore our family apart. At my son's engagement party, I watched him propose on one knee in front of 50 guests. The ring caught the light, diamonds sparkling like promises. But when he stood to kiss his fiancée, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The way she looked past him, scanning the crowd with calculating eyes, the smile that never reached her face, and then her whisper, sharp enough to cut glass. Finally, now the real work begins. That moment cracked open a truth I'd been trying to ignore. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The applause died in my throat. Around us, champagne glasses clinked in celebration. But I stood frozen, watching my son's face glow with love while she measured the room like an appraiser. Her name was Victoria, and she was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful. Polished, perfect, and somehow cold to the touch. The silence that followed her whisper was heavy and unnatural, filled with words no one else had heard but me. The air was thick with celebration, but underneath it all, I felt something darker stirring. I was still standing by the dessert table, one hand gripping a champagne flute I hadn't touched, the other clutching the edge of the linen cloth to steady myself. My chest burned where anxiety had struck like a fist, but that pain was nothing compared to the ice crawling under my skin. I moved slowly, deliberately, the way a man moves when life has shown him too much truth at once. The laughter around me felt hollow now. People shifted in their seats, oblivious to what I had witnessed, lost in their own conversations about wedding plans and summer vacations. My son Michael stood radiant in his Navy suit, the same one we had picked out together at Men's Warehouse 3 months ago. His hand found Victoria's waist, pulling her close as guests approached with congratulations. Victoria's hand flew to her chest in practiced surprise when an elderly aunt complimented her ring. Her laugh tilted like music, spilling charm across the gathering. Her face was pale porcelain, her lips curved in the perfect smile of a woman who knew exactly how beautiful she was. I could see in her eyes the satisfaction of a plan falling into place. She had dreamed of this moment, had orchestrated every detail, but not for the reasons my son believed. I met her gaze across the crowded patio. For just a moment, the mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed slightly, calculating, as if she was measuring me the way she had measured everyone else. Then the smile returned, bright and empty as a billboard. She needed to see something stronger than suspicion in my face. She needed to see the man who had raised Michael to believe in honest love. The party host, Victoria's father Richard, stood tall and commanding in his tailored suit. His presence filled the space like expensive cologne, noticeable, overwhelming, designed to impress. He moved between guests with the confidence of a man who had never been told no, whispering to the catering staff, adjusting flower arrangements, orchestrating his daughter's perfect moment. His laugh was practiced, hollow, the sound money makes when it tries to buy joy. And then there was Michael's best friend, Danny, the man who had driven up from our hometown. His work boots looked out of place on the marble patio, his off-the-rack suit wrinkled from the 3-hour drive. He stared at me as if he had seen something die before his eyes. His face carried the same confusion I felt, the recognition that something fundamental had shifted in a world we thought we understood. "Mr. Patterson, is everything all right?" Danny's words were quiet, uncertain, but they carried enough concern to cut through the party noise. Heads didn't turn toward him. Guests continued their conversations about Victoria's dress, about the beautiful venue, about what a lovely couple they made. My son looked between us, his eyes searching for meaning in a puzzle he hadn't known existed. I steadied myself. I didn't answer Danny immediately. The weight of what I had heard was like carrying a secret that could shatter everything. I brushed off my jacket, straightened what dignity I could gather, and forced my legs to move toward the happy couple. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, every movement deliberate and heavy. I placed my hand on Michael's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his joy through the fabric. He turned to me with eyes bright as a child's on Christmas morning, completely unaware that his world had just shifted on its axis. I offered him the smallest nod, a signal that his happiness was safe with me, for now. But deep inside, I felt the first crack in the glass of the life he thought he was building. The officiant of their upcoming wedding cleared his throat nearby, trying to make small talk with other guests. His words blended into the background noise. Victoria's friends clustered around her, their voices rising and falling like waves against a shore. But nothing was the same. Not after that whisper. Not after seeing the truth behind her practiced smile. I let the noise blur. I let the faces fade. My mind drifted, as it often does in moments of great strain, back to wood shavings and the smell of fresh paint. Back to another celebration, one built not for show, but for love. I could see it even now. The garage behind our old house where I had built Michael's first treehouse, sanding the boards until my hands were raw. He had been 8, his gap-toothed grin wide as he handed me nails, asking about every measurement, every angle. I built that treehouse so he could have his own space, so he could know that even in a world of scraped knees and homework, there was a place made just for him. The walls were painted green because it was his favorite color then, before he discovered sports teams and later, before Victoria convinced him that sophistication meant neutral tones. He had spent entire afternoons up there, reading comic books, building model airplanes, dreaming about who he wanted to become. When Sarah died, that treehouse was where he went to cry alone, thinking I couldn't see him from the kitchen window. But I could. I watched him grieve in that space I had built for joy, and I knew that someday I would have to help him understand that love wasn't always about building. Sometimes it was about protecting what had already been built. That memory cut into the present like glass under skin. Because here I was, decades later, watching him celebrate an engagement, but this time it wasn't fate or tragedy that threatened his happiness. It was the woman who claimed to love him, who had just revealed her true intentions with 6 words that would haunt me for weeks to come. The party pressed forward, though my heart wasn't in it. I barely heard the toasts, the promises of future celebrations spoken as if words alone could guarantee happiness. My ears rang with Victoria's voice, her casual dismissal of everything Michael valued, everything that made him who he was. As guests raised their champagne glasses, as laughter echoed across the manicured lawn, I sat quietly in my folding chair, hands clasped, eyes alert. My body was at that party, but my mind was elsewhere, already searching, already planning, because I knew manipulation like this doesn't stop at engagement rings. It grows. It tests how much it can take, until it takes everything that matters. The music continued, soft jazz floating from hidden speakers. Guests tried to return to celebration, but I could feel the undercurrent of something deeper. Victoria basked in the attention, her diamond catching the late afternoon sun, believing she had secured her prize. She had, though not in the way she intended. She had revealed herself, shown her hand to the one person who loved Michael enough to see through the performance. Danny approached again, his boots quiet on the stone patio. When he reached me, he bent slightly, his voice low but urgent. "Something's not right about this whole thing, Mr. Patterson. The way she talks about him when he's not around, it's like he's—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Like he's a project," I finished quietly. Danny nodded, relief and concern warring in his expression. "Exactly. And Mike doesn't see it. He thinks she's helping him become a better version of himself." The name hit me like a physical blow. Michael, my son's name, spoken with the casual affection of 20 years of friendship. Danny had been there for birthday parties in our backyard, for camping trips where they'd stayed up too late telling ghost stories. He'd been there when Sarah got sick, helping with yard work while I drove back and forth to the hospital. He knew Michael not as a project or an investment, but as a person worth loving exactly as he was. I did not answer Danny immediately, because some truths wait for the right silence, the right moment, the right audience. But I saw the recognition in his face, the shift in his posture, the weight of shared concern. Ready, to become something stronger. The party played on. The couple smiled and posed for photographs. The guests gossiped about wedding plans and honeymoon destinations. But underneath it all, a current had started, one that would soon sweep through the careful facade Victoria had constructed. I leaned back in my chair, fingers brushing the silver chain beneath my shirt, where Sarah's wedding ring rested against my chest. The metal was warm, steady, a reminder of what real love looked like. Not perfect, not calculated, but honest and enduring. And as I sat there, disturbed but not defeated, I felt the story of that evening change course. Because sometimes protecting the people you love begins with really listening to what others reveal about themselves. When the party wound down and guests began filtering toward their cars, I slipped away from the main group. A man learns after 62 years how to become invisible even when people are looking right at him. I moved past the fountain with its dancing lights, past the caterers packing up crystal glasses and silver platters, until the laughter dulled behind me. By the time I reached the street where I had parked my truck, the chill of early evening hit my face like a second awakening. My hand ached from gripping that champagne flute earlier, a dull throb under the skin that reminded me of the shock I'd felt hearing Victoria's words. I flexed my fingers slowly. They were stiff, swollen from tension, but still mine. The same hands that had changed diapers and tied shoelaces, that had held Sarah's hand through chemotherapy, that had taught Michael to throw a curveball in our backyard when he was 10. I walked the few blocks to my truck, slid into the worn seat, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The quiet inside was different from the quiet at that party. This was the kind of quiet that lets a man think, that lets truth settle without the interference of small talk and social obligations. I rested my palms on the steering wheel and stared at them. Hands tell a story the way faces never can. A face can lie, can smile while it schemes, but hands are honest. My fingers were bent from years of grading papers, knuckles swollen from weekend projects when old houses fight back. Scars lined my palms like a road map, each one marking a lesson learned, a mistake survived, a problem solved. These were the hands that built a life when life tried to take everything away. After Sarah died, people told me to start dating again. They said a grown man needed companionship, that isolation wasn't healthy. But I knew what I needed was stability, purpose, the knowledge that someone still needed me to be strong. So, I went back to the classroom. Day after day, lesson plans and parent conferences, coffee-stained grade books, and staying late to help struggling students. Every paycheck went to the mortgage, to keeping Michael in college, to making sure he had choices I'd never had. I remember nights when my hands shook from exhaustion. I would come home to our empty house, collapse into Sarah's old reading chair, and still those familiar footsteps would sound on the front porch. Michael, home from college for the weekend, would walk through the door and find me there. He would sit on the arm of the chair, place his bigger hand over mine, and say, "You smell like whiteboard markers, Dad." It was never said as a complaint. It was comfort. The scent of dry erase markers and coffee was the scent of home to him, the smell of a father who showed up every day. That memory softened the sharp edge of worry still lodged in my chest from the party. I had been shocked by Victoria's callousness. Yes, shaken by the casual cruelty of her plan. Yes, but I had survived worse. And these hands, these scarred, tired hands, had always found a way to protect what mattered most. The next morning, I went back to Jefferson High School. Not because it was a school day, it was Saturday, but because the classroom was the only place that still felt entirely mine. The old brick building stood solid against the gray morning sky, unchanged by the previous night's revelations. Inside, the halls smelled of floor wax and teenage dreams, of decades of hope and disappointment and small victories. I unlocked my classroom door, flicked on the fluorescent lights that buzzed like tired bees, and breathed in the familiar smell of books and markers and the faint residue of countless lessons taught. My desk sat cluttered with ungraded essays, coffee rings staining the wood surface that had been old when I started teaching here 25 years ago. I pulled out my chair, the one with the squeaky wheel that I kept meaning to fix, and went to work. Not on lesson plans, but on understanding. I opened my laptop, the one Michael had given me 2 Christmases ago, and began to research. Victoria Ashworth. Her family, her background, her real story. The rhythm of investigation calmed me. Click and read, bookmark, and cross-reference. The steady work of a teacher who had spent decades learning how to separate truth from assumption. My hands remembered the motions, typing, scrolling, taking notes, in the margins of printouts. That was the thing about honest work. It carved itself into muscle memory, became a tool you could use even when the subject matter was personal and painful. What I found made my stomach clench. Social media posts that painted a picture of calculated ambition. Photos from charity events where Victoria posed with perfect smiles beside community leaders and business executives. Captions that spoke of networking opportunities and strategic partnerships. A LinkedIn profile that described her volunteer work in terms of brand building and visibility enhancement. And then, buried in a local newspaper article from 2 years ago, a quote that made my blood run cold. Victoria Ashworth believes in the power of image transformation. Everyone has potential, she says, but sometimes that potential needs proper guidance to reach its full expression. I printed the article, read it again. The words jumped off the page like accusations. Image transformation, proper guidance, full expression, the language of someone who saw people as projects, relationships as business propositions. At one point, I leaned back in my desk chair, the springs creaking in protest, and let my eyes wander around the classroom. On the walls hung inspirational posters. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, and the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Student artwork. From years past, thank you cards from graduates, photos from school events where teenagers smiled, gap-toothed, and genuine. And there, pinned to my bulletin board, was a photo of Michael from his high school graduation, cap askew, diploma held high, his arm around my shoulder as we both grinned at Sarah behind the camera. He looked so young, so full of possibility, so trusting in the world's basic goodness. The boy who had cried over roadkill, who had insisted we take in every stray cat in the neighborhood, who had held my hand at his mother's funeral and promised we would take care of each other. I stared at that photo for a long time. I could almost hear Sarah's voice, the way she used to talk to me late at night when she couldn't sleep during those last months. "Tom," she would say, "promise me you'll watch out for him. Not just his safety, but his heart. Don't let anyone convince him he needs to be different to be worthy of love." The sound of my phone buzzing on the desk cut through the memory. I picked it up, expecting a text from a colleague or maybe a robocall. Instead, it was a notification from social media. Michael had tagged me in a post. My thumb hesitated over the screen, then tapped. There it was, a photo of Michael and Victoria from the night before, her diamond ring prominently displayed, his face glowing with happiness. The caption read, "Can't wait to start this new chapter with my amazing fiancée. She sees so much potential in me that I never knew I had. Time to level up. Blessed. Transformation. New beginnings." The words bled into me like acid. Transformation. Level up. She sees potential. These weren't the words of a man in love. They were the vocabulary of someone who had been convinced he wasn't enough as he was. I set the phone down gently, though every instinct screamed to hurl it against the whiteboard. My breath came shallow, and for a long moment all I could hear was the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of Saturday morning traffic. I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, hands clasped tight, and let the anger pass through me like a fever breaking. I let the sting transform into something else. Resolve. Sarah's voice echoed in my memory again. Clearer this time. I had made her a promise, and promises to the dead carry more weight than promises to the living. They can't be renegotiated or forgotten. They become the foundation on which everything else is built. The classroom clock ticked steadily above the door, marking time with the same relentless precision it had shown through thousands of lessons, millions of small moments that added up to an education. I stood, walked to the window that looked out over the football field where Michael had played linebacker for 3 years, where he'd learned that sometimes protecting what you love means taking a hit yourself. I spoke softly to the empty room, my voice carrying across decades of other conversations held in this space. I promised you, Sarah. I promised I'd protect him. The promise didn't mean stopping Michael from making his own choices. He was 26 now, a grown man with his own apartment and his own life. But it did mean making sure he had all the information he needed to make those choices wisely. It meant he deserved to know the difference between someone who loved him and someone who saw him as a project in need of improvement. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Sunlight shifted across the classroom floor, throwing shadows that moved like time itself. I closed the laptop, gathered the printouts, and locked them in my desk drawer. There was work to be done, but it would require patience, strategy, and the kind of careful planning that 25 years of teaching had ingrained in me. That afternoon, Michael came by the house. He always came by on Saturdays when he was in town, the same way he had since starting college 8 years ago. I heard his key in the front door, heard him call out as he walked through the living room where Sarah's piano still sat covered with family photos. "Dad, you here?" I stepped out of the kitchen, where I had been making his favorite sandwich, turkey and Swiss on the bread Sarah used to bake, though mine came from the grocery store. He stood in the doorway, still tall and lean like he'd been in high school. But something in his posture had changed over the past 6 months. His shoulders carried a tension that hadn't been there before, and his smile seemed practiced in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of Victoria. "I'm here, son," I said, the same greeting I'd given him since he was old enough to walk through that door on his own. He crossed the room and hugged me, and I held him close the way I had when he was small and scared of thunderstorms. But now I was the one who was scared. Terrified of losing him to someone who saw his kindness as weakness, his authenticity as something that needed polishing. "I brought pictures from last night," he said, pulling back with excitement that seemed genuine. He handed me his phone, swiping through photos of the engagement party. "Victoria looked incredible, didn't she? And her father's place is amazing. Did you see the gardens?" I scrolled through the images, seeing them with different eyes now. Victoria posed perfectly in each shot, her smile camera-ready, her hand positioned to show off the ring. Michael looked happy but somehow smaller beside her, as if he was already learning to take up less space. "She's very photogenic," I said carefully. He beamed. "She's been helping me with my image too. Says I have great potential, but need better presentation. Look." He gestured to his outfit. Expensive jeans, a fitted shirt that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 3 months. "She picked this out. Says the way you dress is the first thing people notice about you." My heart clenched. "You always dress just fine, Michael." "Yeah, but fine isn't enough anymore, Dad. Victoria's world is different, more sophisticated. She's teaching me how to fit in." I handed him back the phone, choosing my words carefully. "Do you feel like yourself when you're with her?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He paused, his brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean? I mean, does she make you feel comfortable being who you are, or do you feel like you're always trying to become someone else?" He was quiet for a moment, and I could see him thinking, processing. "She just wants me to be the best version of myself," he said finally. But there was something uncertain in his voice. "Your mother always said the best version of yourself is just yourself, but braver." His eyes flickered with something I couldn't identify. Pain, maybe, or recognition. "Mom never met anyone like Victoria." "No," I agreed quietly. "She didn't." We stood there in the kitchen where he'd done homework at the table for 12 years, where Sarah had taught him to scramble eggs and fold laundry, where he'd told us about his first heartbreak and his college acceptance, and every important moment in between. The silence stretched between us, filled with things neither of us was ready to say. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Victoria wants to have dinner with you next week. Just the 3 of us. She thinks you two got off on the wrong foot, and she'd like to try again. I nodded, though alarms were ringing in my head. That would be nice, he smiled, relieved. Great. She's made reservations at this place downtown, really upscale. She wants to show you she's serious about being part of the family. After he left, I sat in Sarah's chair, the one where she used to grade her own papers when she was still teaching 3rd grade. The house felt larger without his presence, emptier, filled with the echo of conversations that mattered more than either of us had said out loud. I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through those engagement photos, studying them with the careful attention I gave to primary source documents in my history classes. In every picture, Victoria looked perfect, controlled, calculated. But Michael looked like he was trying to become someone else, someone worthy of standing next to her. The boy who had built blanket forts and collected baseball cards, who had cried over injured animals and worked summers to help pay for his mother's medical bills, was disappearing, piece by piece. And the woman who claimed to love him was the architect of his transformation. I thought about the dinner invitation, about what Victoria really wanted from that meeting. It wasn't reconciliation. It was control. She wanted to neutralize the one person who might interfere with her project, who might remind Michael of who he used to be before she started improving him. The clock on the mantel chimed 6 times, marking another hour closer to whatever came next. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening routines, porch lights flickering on, the smell of dinner drifting from open windows, dogs barking their familiar territorial songs. I touched the chain around my neck where Sarah's ring hung warm and constant. I'm not giving up on him, I whispered to her memory. I won't let her erase everything we built together. Some battles can't be fought with words or confrontation. Sometimes you have to be patient, strategic, watchful. Sometimes you have to let people reveal themselves while you document every revelation, waiting for the moment when truth becomes impossible to ignore. The dinner invitation was an opportunity, I realized. A chance to see Victoria's performance up close, to understand her strategy, to gather the evidence Michael would need when he was finally ready to see it. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and marked the date on the calendar hanging by the refrigerator. Then I went back to my desk and unlocked the drawer where I had stored the research, adding one more note to the growing file. Dinner. Let her show me who she really is. The house settled into quiet around me. But it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the quiet of preparation, of a father getting ready to fight for his son's soul. The restaurant Victoria chose was the kind of place that whispered wealth in every detail. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms across white tablecloths. Servers moved with ballet precision, and the menu was written in fonts that suggested eating here was a cultural experience, not just a meal. I stood in the entrance wearing my best suit, the same one I'd worn to Michael's college graduation, feeling like an imposter in a world designed to make people like me feel exactly that way. Victoria was already seated when I arrived, positioned at a corner table where she could survey the dining room like a queen holding court. She rose gracefully when she saw me, extending her hand with practiced elegance. Her dress was understated but expensive. Her jewelry, minimal, but clearly costly. Everything about her presentation screamed money without being vulgar about it. Mr. Patterson, she said, her smile warm and inviting. Thank you so much for coming. I've been looking forward to this. I shook her hand, noting how soft it was, unmarked by any kind of real work. Thank you for inviting me. Michael arrived moments later, slightly out of breath, his hair perfectly styled in a way that looked effortless but probably took 20 minutes to achieve. He kissed Victoria's cheek, squeezed my shoulder, and slid into his chair with the nervous energy of someone who desperately wanted the evening to go well. This is great, he said, looking between us with hopeful eyes. My two favorite people. Getting to know each other better. Victoria's smile widened, but I caught something calculating in her eyes, a quick assessment of how to play the scene. Your father raised an amazing man, she said, reaching across to squeeze Michael's hand. I hope I can convince him that I see how special you are. The words were perfect, Exactly what a protective father would want to hear. But there was something rehearsed about the delivery, like dialogue from a play she'd performed before. The waiter appeared with menus bound in leather, describing specials in the kind of reverential tone usually reserved for religious ceremonies. The prices weren't listed, which told me everything I needed to know about the evening's hidden agenda. This wasn't dinner. It was a demonstration of the world Victoria inhabited, and by extension, the world she was offering Michael. "Order whatever you'd like, Mr. Patterson," Victoria said graciously. "This is my treat. It's important to me that we start fresh." I ordered simply salmon, vegetables, nothing that would require explanation or special preparation. Michael followed Victoria's lead, selecting dishes with French names that I suspected he'd never heard of before meeting her. She ordered wine without consulting either of us, speaking to the sommelier in terminology that was clearly meant to impress. As we waited for our food, Victoria launched into what felt like a carefully prepared presentation. She asked about my teaching, nodded sympathetically when I mentioned the challenges of public education funding, and spoke warmly about the importance of educators in society. Her performance was flawless, the perfect daughter-in-law showing proper respect for her fiancé's father. But I was listening for something else. I was waiting for the moment when the mask would slip, when she would reveal the person Michael didn't see. It didn't take long. "Teaching must be so rewarding," she said, dabbing her lips with her napkin. "Though I imagine it can be frustrating too, working with students who don't appreciate the opportunities they're being given. Some students face challenges that make learning difficult," I replied carefully. "Poverty, family problems, learning disabilities. Part of our job is meeting them where they are." Her expression shifted slightly. A flash of something colder. "Of course. Though at some point, personal responsibility has to factor in, doesn't it? I mean, everyone has the same access to education. What they do with it is really up to them." Michael nodded along, though I remembered him tutoring struggling classmates in high school. Spending his own lunch periods helping kids who couldn't afford outside help. "It's more complicated than that," I said. "Not everyone starts from the same place." Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I suppose we see things differently. I believe people can transcend their circumstances if they're willing to put in the work." My now. My now. My now. My now. My now. My now, my now, my now, my... Look at Michael. He's grown so much since we've been together. Sometimes, all it takes is the right influence, the right vision of what's possible. There it was, the first crack in the facade. Michael was a project to be improved, not a person to be loved as he was. "What kind of growth are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She turned to Michael with a smile that seemed genuine until you looked at her eyes. "Tell your father about your new goals, honey." Michael straightened, and I could see him shift into presentation mode. "Victoria's been helping me think bigger, Dad. My teaching position is fine for now, but there are so many more opportunities out there. She's introduced me to people in business, in politics. I'm thinking about going back to school, maybe getting an MBA. My stomach dropped. Michael had never shown any interest in business. He'd chosen teaching because he loved literature, loved sharing stories with young people who needed to believe their own stories mattered. "That's quite a change," I said carefully. Victoria leaned forward, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something to a slow student. "The thing is, Mr. Patterson, Michael has so much potential that's just going untapped in his current position. Teaching is admirable, but it's also limiting. There's no real growth trajectory, no opportunity to build wealth, no social mobility. I'm just helping him see possibilities he never considered before." She spoke about my son like he was a stock that was underperforming, an asset that needed better management. And the worst part was that Michael was nodding along, as if these were his own thoughts, rather than a renovation of his dreams. "Have you asked Michael what he wants?" I said. The question landed heavily. Victoria's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Michael looked between us. Suddenly, uncertain. "Of course I want what's best for us," he said quickly. "Victoria just helps me think about the bigger picture." "And what did you think about before Victoria helped you see this bigger picture?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. Michael's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, defensiveness, and something that might have been recognition. Victoria recovered quickly, her laugh light and dismissive. "Oh, you know how it is with young people. They're often content with just getting by, not realizing they could have so much more. I've just been encouraging Michael to dream bigger." "His dream seemed plenty big to me," I said quietly. "He wanted to make a difference in kids' lives. He wanted to do work that mattered." "And he still can," Victoria said smoothly. "Just on a larger scale. Think of how much more influence he could have with the right platform, the right connections. I'm not asking him to give up his values, just to expand his vision of how to implement them." It was masterful, the way she reframed manipulation as motivation, the way she made his contentment sound like lack of ambition. I could see Michael processing her words, trying to reconcile the man he'd been with the man she wanted him to become. The main course arrived, giving us all a moment to regroup. But the damage was done. I had seen behind Victoria's perfect mask, had witnessed the subtle way she diminished everything that made Michael who he was, while promising to help him become someone better. As we ate, Victoria continued her charm offensive, asking about my interests, my retirement plans, my thoughts on Michael's childhood. Her questions were perfect, her responses appropriate, her manner warm and engaging. Anyone watching would have seen a lovely young woman making an effort with her future father-in-law. But I heard the subtext. When I mentioned Michael's love of reading as a child, she smiled and said, "We're working on expanding his interests beyond just books." When I talked about the community garden where he'd volunteered in high school, she nodded and said, "It's sweet how he cares about local issues. Though there are bigger ways to make an impact." Every memory I shared of my son was subtly reframed as something he was growing beyond, something charming but limited, something that belonged to his past rather than his future. When dessert came, Victoria excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Michael and me alone for the first time all evening. The silence that followed felt heavy, with unspoken questions. "She's trying really hard, Dad," Michael said finally. "I know she can come across as a little intense sometimes, but she genuinely wants you to like her." I studied my son's face, seeing the boy who used to bring me dandelions he'd picked from the yard, who'd insisted we bury every dead bird we found because everything deserves a funeral. That boy was still there, buried under designer clothes and careful speech, but still there. "Michael," I said gently, "do you still want to teach?" The question seemed to surprise him. More than what?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his untouched dessert. When he looked up, his eyes were confused, almost lost. "I don't know anymore, Dad. Sometimes I feel like I don't know anything anymore." Before I could respond, Victoria returned, sliding back into her seat with an apologetic smile. "Sorry about that. Work emergency? Where were we?" But the moment was gone, and Michael's face closed off again, resuming the careful mask he'd learned to wear in her presence. As we waited for the check, Victoria made one final play. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box, placing it in front of me with a shy smile. "I wanted to give you this," she said, "a small token of appreciation for raising such an incredible man." Inside was a expensive pen, engraved with my initials. The kind of gift that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month, chosen to make me feel both grateful and inadequate. It was perfectly calculated, generous enough to seem thoughtful, expensive enough to remind me of the difference in our resources. "You didn't need to do this," I said, though I accepted the gift politely. "I wanted to," she insisted. "Family is so important to me. I hope you know that I would never want to come between you and Michael. I just want to help him reach his full potential." There it was again. Potential. The word that had haunted me since the engagement party. I smiled and thanked her, but inside, something crystallized. This wasn't about family at all. This was about ownership, control, the systematic dismantling of everything that made Michael who he was. When the check came, Victoria insisted on paying, making a show of her platinum card, the kind that comes with concierge services and no preset spending limit. The gesture was meant to be generous, but it felt like a power play, a reminder of her resources and my limitations. We said our goodbyes in the restaurant's marble lobby. Victoria hugged me warmly, her perfume expensive and cloying. "I'm so glad we had this chance to talk," she said. "I hope you feel better about Michael's future now." I smiled non-committally, shook Michael's hand, and watched them walk toward the valet stand where a sleek BMW waited. Through the restaurant's windows, I could see them talking, her hand on his arm, her mouth moving rapidly. Even from a distance, I could tell she was debriefing the evening, analyzing my responses, planning her next moves. I took the subway home, the expensive pen heavy in my jacket pocket like evidence of a crime I couldn't yet prove. The train car was filled with the usual Saturday night crowd, couples heading to shows, friends meeting for drinks, people living lives that weren't being carefully managed by others. I envied their simplicity. Back in my quiet house, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote down everything I could remember from the evening. Victoria's words, her expressions, the moments when her mask had slipped, the way she dismissed Michael's teaching career, reframed his contentment as complacency, positioned herself as his salvation from a life of mediocrity. Most importantly, I documented that moment of uncertainty in Michael's eyes when I'd asked if he still wanted to teach. The confusion, the doubt, the glimpse of the boy I'd raised breaking through the surface of the man she was creating. 2 days later, Michael called. His voice sounded strained, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "Dad, can I come over? I need to talk to someone." "Of course. I'll make coffee." He arrived 20 minutes later, still dressed in the expensive clothes Victoria preferred, but something about his posture had changed. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a man carrying weight he couldn't quite identify. We sat in the living room where he'd done homework for 12 years, where Sarah had read him bedtime stories until he was too old to admit he still wanted them. The silence stretched between us until he finally spoke. "Victoria thinks the dinner went well," he said, not meeting my eyes. "She says you're starting to understand her vision for our future." I said nothing, waiting. "But I keep thinking about what you asked me, about whether I still want to teach." He looked up then, and his eyes were the same ones that had looked at me when he was 8 and asked why his mother was sick, when he was 15 and wondered if he'd ever be good enough to play college ball, when he was 22 and uncertain about his career choice. "Do you?" I asked, gently. His voice broke slightly. "I don't know anymore. I used to love going to work. Loved seeing kids get excited about books, about ideas. But Victoria says that's not enough, that I'm wasting my potential, that I could be doing something that matters more. What matters more than helping kids believe in themselves?" The question hung in the air. Michael's face crumpled, and suddenly he was crying, not the quiet tears of adult disappointment, but the deep sobs of someone who had lost something essential and only just realized it was gone. I moved to the couch beside him, put my arm around his shoulders the way I had when he was small and the world felt too big to handle. "I don't recognize myself anymore, Dad," he whispered between sobs. "I look in the mirror and I see this person in expensive clothes with opinions I never had, dreams that don't feel like mine. And the worst part is, I don't know how it happened. It was so gradual, so gentle. She never demanded anything, just suggested things, encouraged me to grow, made me feel like who I was before wasn't good enough." My heart broke and soared simultaneously. He was seeing it. Finally, he was seeing what had been done to him. "She loves me," he continued, as if trying to convince himself. "I know she does. She tells me all the time how much potential I have, how proud she is of my progress." "Son," I said carefully, Love doesn't require you to become a different person. Love sees who you are and says, that's enough. He was quiet for a long time, processing. Then, Mom never tried to change you, did she? The question gutted me. Never. Your mother fell in love with a high school history teacher who wore the same pair of jeans until they fell apart and thought a fancy dinner was pizza with extra cheese. She never once suggested I should become someone else. But Victoria says, I know what Victoria says, but let me ask you something. When was the last time she asked what you wanted instead of telling you what you should want? The silence that followed was answer enough. Michael slumped against me, exhausted by the weight of trying to be someone he wasn't. What do I do, Dad? We're engaged. People are expecting a wedding. Her family has already made deposits. Sent invitations. Those are logistics, I said firmly. The question is, do you want to spend your life with someone who thinks you need to be fixed, or do you want to find someone who loves the man you already are? He stayed for another hour, talking through memories that Victoria had slowly convinced him to be embarrassed by. His volunteer work at the animal shelter, his love of camping, his habit of reading 3 books at once, all the things that made him Michael, that she had categorized as childish or limiting. When he left, he hugged me tighter than he had in months. I need to think about some things, he said. Take all the time you need, but remember, the boy who built snow forts and rescued stray cats and cried at Bambi, that boy was worth loving exactly as he was. 3 days later, Victoria called me directly. Her voice was different, sharper, less controlled than it had been at dinner. Mr. Patterson, I think we need to talk. Michael has been behaving strangely since our dinner, asking odd questions, second-guessing decisions we've already made together. I'm concerned that something you said might have upset him. I kept my voice neutral. I think you are. Michael is in a fragile place right now, making big life changes, growing into the man he's meant to be. The last thing he needs is someone filling his head with doubts about his future. The mask was completely off now. This wasn't a concerned fiancé calling her future father-in-law. This was a woman whose project was being threatened. Maybe the doubts aren't coming from me, I suggested. Maybe they're coming from him. Michael doesn't have doubts. He has goals, ambitions, a clear vision of what he wants to become. You're the one who's confused, who can't see past your own limitations to appreciate what I'm offering him. And there it was. The contempt she'd been hiding behind charity dinners and expensive gifts. What exactly are you offering him? A real life, success, social mobility, the chance to matter in the world instead of just hiding in some classroom pretending that teaching remedial English to ungrateful teenagers is making a difference. Each word was designed to cut, to reduce Michael's chosen career to something pathetic and small. But they also revealed Victoria's true feelings about the work my son loved, about the values that had shaped him. I see, I said calmly. And what happens if Michael decides he's happy with his pathetic little life? The silence that followed was arctic. When she spoke again, her voice was deadly quiet. That would be a mistake. A costly one. Michael has made commitments. To me. To our future. To the life we're building together. Walking away from those commitments would have consequences. Social consequences. Professional consequences. I have friends in the education system, Mr. Patterson. I have influence in circles you've never heard of. There it was. The threat I'd been waiting for. Victoria wasn't just trying to transform Michael. She was prepared to destroy him if he resisted. Is that what you told him when he started having second thoughts? I told him the truth. That some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. That there are costs to disappointing people who have invested in your future. People like you. People like me. People who matter. People who can open doors or slam them shut. I felt a cold fury building in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. Victoria, let me tell you something about my son that you might not understand. He's stronger than you think. And he's loved in ways that have nothing to do with his potential or his usefulness or his ability to be molded into someone else's vision of success. Love doesn't pay bills, Mr. Patterson. Love doesn't build careers. Love is a luxury for people who can afford to be sentimental. You're wrong about that. But more importantly, you're wrong about Michael. He's going to figure out who he is, with or without your permission. And when he does, all your threats and influence won't matter. She hung up without another word. I sat in my quiet kitchen, phone still in my hand, and realized that the gloves were completely off now. Victoria had revealed herself as exactly what I'd suspected, a woman who saw people as assets to be acquired and managed, who would use threats and manipulation to maintain control over her investments. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated the power of unconditional love, the strength that comes from knowing you're valued for who you are rather than what you might become. That night, I called Danny, Michael's best friend. We met at the same diner where we'd shared countless meals during Michael's high school years, back when his biggest worry was whether he'd pass calculus. "He's not the same person, Mr. Patterson," Danny said over coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner. I mean, he looks like Mike, sounds like Mike, but there's something missing. Like someone dimmed his light. I know, and I think he's starting to know it too. Danny leaned forward, his work-roughened hands wrapped around his mug. "What can we do?" "Nothing," I said, surprising him. "We can't save him from this. He has to save himself, but we can be here when he's ready. Remind him of who he used to be. Show him it's safe to come home to himself. And if he doesn't? If she wins?" I thought about Sarah, about the promise I'd made to protect our boy's heart. Then we love him anyway, even if we have to love him from a distance. But I didn't believe it would come to that. Because despite everything Victoria had done, despite all her careful manipulation and threats, she had missed something fundamental about Michael. She saw his kindness as weakness, his contentment as lack of ambition. She didn't understand that the very qualities that made him easy to manipulate also made him impossible to truly change. The boy who cried over roadkill was still in there. The man who chose teaching because he wanted to make a difference was still fighting to surface. And sometimes that's all it takes. The knowledge that who you were is still worth fighting for. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Thursday. I answered on the second ring, already knowing it would be Michael. "Dad?" His voice was shaky, distant. "Can you come get me?" "Where are you?" "Victoria's apartment." "We had a fight. Dad, I can't do this anymore." I was dressed and in my truck within 5 minutes, driving through empty streets toward Manhattan. The city looked different at that hour. Sharper, more honest, stripped of its daytime pretenses. I found Michael sitting on the steps of Victoria's building, still in his pajamas with a duffel bag at his feet. He looked like he had when he was 7 and had run away from home after we'd argued about bedtime, making it as far as the front porch before realizing he had nowhere else to go. He climbed into the truck without a word. We drove in silence for 10 minutes before he finally spoke. "She said she loved me, but only the person I was becoming, not the person I am." I reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "Then, she didn't love you at all. She had our whole life planned out. Where we'd live, what jobs I'd take, which friends were acceptable, which family members we'd need to distance ourselves from." He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. I was going to lose everything that mattered to me, and I was supposed to be grateful for the privilege. "What changed your mind?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Today, I got a letter from one of my students, Jamie Rodriguez. You remember him? The kid who was failing everything when the year started?" I nodded. Michael had mentioned Jamie before, spent extra time helping him with reading comprehension. He wrote to thank me for not giving up on him. Said I was the first teacher who ever made him feel smart, who made him believe he could do more than he thought. And I realized, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is where I belong. "What did Victoria say when you told her?" His laugh was bitter. She said I was being small-minded, that I was choosing to be mediocre when I could be extraordinary. She said if I walked away from our plans, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. And what did you say? I said I'd rather regret being myself than regret losing myself. We pulled into our driveway, past the mailbox that still had both our names painted in Sarah's careful script. The house looked smaller than it had when he'd lived here, but solid, real, honest in the way expensive things never quite managed to be. Inside, I made coffee while Michael sat at the kitchen table, running his fingers over initials he'd carved into the wood when he was 12. S.M. plus M.P. Sarah Marie plus Michael Patterson. His way of making sure his mother would always be part of the furniture. I have to give her back the ring, he said suddenly. Do you want me to go with you? He shook his head. I need to do this myself. But thank you. He did it the next day, driving back to Manhattan in his old pickup truck, the one Victoria had convinced him to trade in for something more professional. I'd helped him buy it back from the dealer, paying the restocking fee without complaint. When he returned, he was different. Not broken, not defeated, but lighter somehow. Like he'd been carrying weight he didn't realize was there until he set it down. How did she take it? I asked. About like you'd expect. Tears, accusations, threats. She said I was throwing away the best thing that ever happened to me. He paused, looking out the window at the garden, where Sarah's roses still bloomed every spring. But you know what? The best thing that ever happened to me was growing up in this house, with parents who loved me exactly as I was. Everything else is just details. 2 months later, Michael moved back into his old room, not permanently, but long Ginoweg to remember who he'd been before Victoria started improving him. He went back to wearing jeans and flannel shirts, started volunteering at the animal shelter again, resumed his habit of reading 3 books at once. And slowly, like a flower turning toward sunlight, he began to look like himself again. The wedding would have been next weekend. Instead, Michael spent Saturday morning coaching Little League, something Victoria had discouraged as limiting his professional image. That evening, we grilled burgers in the backyard and talked about his plans to pursue a master's degree in education. Not business, not politics, but the subject he'd always loved. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up? He asked as we cleaned up the dishes. I thought about Sarah, about the promise I'd made to protect his heart. I didn't speak up, I said. I just asked questions and waited for you to find your own answers. But you knew, didn't you? From the beginning. I nodded. I knew she didn't see you the way your mother and I always have, as someone who was already complete, already worthy, already enough. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm sorry, I almost forgot that. You didn't forget. It was just buried under someone else's expectations. But it was always there, waiting for you to come home to yourself. 6 months later, at a school fundraiser, Michael met Sarah. Yes, Sarah, named after the grandmother who had raised her. She was a librarian with kind eyes and a laugh that made you want to join in. She wore a simple dress and comfortable shoes, and when Michael introduced us, she immediately asked to see pictures of his mother. Their relationship was different from the start. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, no project management. Just 2 people who enjoyed each other's company, who brought out the best in each other without demanding fundamental change. When Michael told me he was thinking about proposing, I asked him the same question I'd asked about Victoria. Do you feel like yourself when you're with her? His answer came without hesitation. I feel like the best version of myself. Not different, just braver, kinder, more confident in who I already am. That's what love looks like, I realized. Not the promise to transform someone into their potential, but the recognition that they're already exactly who they're meant to be. The engagement party was in our backyard, under the same oak tree where Michael had climbed as a boy. Folding chairs, homemade food, friends from every part of his life, mixing together in comfortable chaos. Sarah wore her grandmother's ring, simple and genuine, and when people asked about wedding plans, she and Michael looked at each other and smiled. We're thinking small. she said. "Just family and friends. Nothing fancy. We want to focus on what matters." As I watched them together, really together, not performing but just being, I felt Sarah's presence like warmth in winter wind. Our boy had found his way home to himself, and in doing so, he'd found someone who loved exactly who he'd found there. The sun set behind the garden where Sarah's roses bloomed wild and untrained, beautiful in their imperfection. In the growing darkness, string lights flickered on, casting gentle light over faces flushed with laughter and love. This was what happiness looked like when it wasn't manufactured, when it wasn't managed, when it grew naturally from soil that had been tended with patience and faith. Michael caught my eye across the yard and raised his beer bottle in a silent toast. I raised my coffee cup in return, and in that moment, I heard Sarah's voice as clearly as if she were standing beside me. "Promise kept. Some battles are won not with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but with quiet persistence, with questions asked at the right moment, with the patient faith that love will always call us home to ourselves." The clock in the kitchen chimed 9 times, marking another hour in a life built on small moments that added up to something larger than their sum. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new opportunities to choose love over fear. But tonight, under stars that had watched over our family for generations, we celebrated not what Michael had become, but who he had always been, and who he had never stopped being, even when the world tried to convince him otherwise. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.